The actual survey places the witness tree here. This map, therefore, contains an intentional falsehood.
When they
designed to
brought
shift
her
the
uncle's
boundary.
buyer into the withdrawing room, Eleanor Voss already knew what sort of bargain had been struck. Men who meant to purchase a woman never began with the woman. They began with the chair she occupied, the blanket over her knees, the uselessness they believed they saw, and the polite fiction that gratitude should make her obedient. So Eleanor sat very still in the high-backed chair near the window and let them underestimate her in peace. Outside, a March rain silvered the yard at Voss Ferry, turning the cart ruts into strips of dark, shining mud. Inside, the room smelled of damp wool, ink, and the sweet fortified wine her uncle produced whenever he wished to disguise greed as hospitality. Mr. Gideon Pike, a widowed trader from the lower river country, stood near the hearth with one boot planted wide and his eyes moving over Eleanor like a man assessing a parcel that might be damaged but still resellable. "Your niece has a composed face," he said. Uncle Matthias gave a laugh too soft to be ashamed of. "She was always clever, too clever, some said. But affliction improves a woman when it teaches her stillness." Eleanor folded one hand over the other. Her legs, thin beneath the blanket and stubbornly unresponsive from the fever that had taken her childhood strength at 12, gave her no warning when storms changed. But her mind did. It sharpened in danger. "And what," she asked, "is the price of stillness this season, Uncle?" Both men turned as if a cabinet had spoken. Matthias recovered first. "You mistake the matter." "I never do that with numbers," Eleanor said, "nor with men who come to inspect me before supper." Mr. Pike's mouth twitched. "I admire spirit, Miss Voss." "Then you must have very little of your own, if mine seems novel." The silence that followed cut cleanly through the room. Matthias's face darkened. He had spent 6 years reminding Eleanor that she lived under his roof by sufferance after her father's death, and her mother's small legacy had disappeared into household necessity. He preferred meek dependence. She had given him useful labor instead. Ledgers balanced, ferry accounts corrected, field boundaries copied, rent rolls put into order. He resented the fact that competence looked too much like evidence. "You forget yourself," he said. "No," Eleanor replied. "I remember myself precisely. That is the trouble." If you find yourself drawn to stories where quiet intelligence survives long enough to change its own fate, stay with Quiet Fires of America and let the fire burn a little longer. To understand how Eleanor Voss came to stand in a crowded county court with forged maps spread before her and the most powerful man in the room waiting for her to speak, one must begin with the house where everyone believed her body had already decided her life. She had not always lived at Voss Ferry. Her father, Jonas Voss, had once been a surveyor, employed along the western edges of old Virginia grants. A patient man, with a weather-browned face, and the radical habit of teaching his daughter what he knew. By the time Eleanor was 10, she could copy field notes, calculate rough distances, and tell by the angle of a river bend when a line had been drawn by a hand that cared more for advantage than truth. At 12, she took a fever that left her alive, brilliant, and unable to walk without being carried. The parish women called it a trial. Her father called it bad luck. Then he set a board across her lap, pinned sheets to it, and continued teaching her map scales. "Land lies even when men do not," he had told her. "If you learn to read the one, you will survive the other." He died 8 years later, when a skiff overturned in spring water cold enough to stop the heart. Eleanor, 20 and newly orphaned, was taken into the household of her father's elder brother Matthias, who kept the ferry crossing and several muddy strips of profitable acreage besides. He claimed duty. In practice, he took possession. By 26, Eleanor had become the invisible instrument of his prosperity. She copied contracts, she corrected weights, she found discrepancies in timber tallies and tobacco loads. She wrote letters in a plain, educated hand that made rough dealings appear lawful. All the while, Matthias told neighbors that the poor girl was fortunate to be kept. He might have continued profiting from her indefinitely if the dispute at Ashford Hundred had not risen into scandal at exactly the wrong moment. The western boundary of Ashford Hundred, an old estate tied to a dormant English title and now managed in Virginia by Alexander Hale, had become the subject of open quarrel. Colonel Bartholomew Creed, who owned the adjoining lands, claimed that an earlier survey placed 200 valuable acres, including a spring-fed tract and part of a timber ridge, inside his own line. Creed had produced maps to prove it, elegant maps, freshly copied, with seals and measurements convincing enough to confuse lesser men. But lesser men did not see what Eleanor saw the first time Uncle Matthias brought one of the copies home. She had asked for it as if from idle curiosity. He had tossed it toward her chair. "You like lines and little numbers? Tell me whether Creed will win." Eleanor spread the sheet across her lapboard and went still. The creek on the lower edge ran in a curve too smooth for the actual watercourse, whose sharp bend she knew from old moats of her father's. The magnetic bearing at the northeast corner had been rounded in a way no field man used unless he meant to conceal a shift. And the boundary tree marked as a white oak had been dead and recorded as such 3 years before her father died. Someone had not merely copied a survey. Someone had remade one. "Where did you get this?" she asked. Matthias shrugged. "From Creed's clerk. Why?" "It is false." He looked up then, wary but interested. "False enough to matter?" "False enough to steal a ridge." That answer should have alarmed an honest man. It delighted him. 3 days later, Eleanor learned why. Matthias meant to sell her. Not in language fit for a bill of sale, of course. He had a justice of the peace prepared to witness a guardianship arrangement. Mr. Pike, needing a competent household manager and a woman too physically limited to run away or demand romance, would assume her maintenance. Matthias would receive debt relief and a favorable timber transport contract in return. Everyone involved would speak of security, Christian charity, and a woman's need for male direction. Eleanor listened from the passage outside his office while the terms were settled. Her body had long taught her patience. Her mind preferred speed. That night, after the house slept, she bribed the kitchen boy with the last silver button from her mother's sewing basket and had herself carried to the records room over the ferry office. There she found, among old trunked papers Matthias had never fully sorted, 2 things: her father's field book for the Ashford tract, and a memorandum noting an unpaid debt of honor owed by one Alexander Hale's late father to Jonas Voss for preventing a fraudulent overgrant 21 years earlier. By dawn she had made her choice. She would not wait to be transferred like freight. She packed lightly, the field book, her own notebook, 3 pencils, a small brass divider, 2 clean collars, and the little folding compass her father once let her keep, though she could not follow him through the woods. Then she woke Ruth, the ferryman's widowed sister, the only soul in the house who had ever treated her helplessness as circumstance rather than identity.
"I need a wagon," Eleanor said. Ruth looked at her once and understood the whole matter by instinct. "Where?" "Ashford 100. The road is half mud. So am I, by family estimation. We shall suit each other." Ruth, which in that house passed for affection. By sunrise, Eleanor was hidden beneath tarpaulin and grain sacks in a narrow produce wagon bound toward the Hale estate. Ashford 100 did not look like rescue when she first saw it. The manor stood broad and weathered above low spring fields, more disciplined than grand. Smoke lifted in orderly lines from the kitchens and weaving house. Men moved with purpose in the yard. Nothing suggested softness. Good, Eleanor thought. Softness had not preserved her. They carried her inside by the side entrance, after Ruth bullied a startled steward into action with the authority of a woman too old to fear rank. Eleanor expected delay, suspicion, perhaps dismissal. Instead, by noon, she found herself in a book-lined office before a man writing with brutal concentration at a walnut desk. Alexander Hale did not rise immediately. He finished the line, sanded it, set the paper aside, and only then lifted his eyes. He was near 35, broad through the shoulders, dark-haired and severe in the clean, unornamented way of men who have learned that authority speaks best when it does not preen. His features were not soft enough for easy charm. His gaze was gray and direct and, to Eleanor's immediate irritation, entirely unreadable. "So," he said, "you are the woman who arrived hidden among turnips to accuse one of my neighbors of forgery." Eleanor folded her hands on the lapboard. "Not forgery alone. Boundary theft, if the court is in a serious mood." One corner of his mouth almost moved. "And your proof?" She placed the field book on his desk. For the first time, his attention sharpened visibly. He opened the book, read 3 pages, then looked up again with greater interest and less politeness. "How did this come to you?" "It belonged to my father." "Jonas Voss?" "You know the name?" "My father did. He said Voss was the one man in 3 counties who could not be bribed into moving a river." "He tried to teach me the same discourtesy." That almost smile again. Then it vanished. "You understand that a woman appearing from nowhere with disputed papers and a story of coercion presents difficulties." "I understand that a man in your position has every reason to doubt me," Eleanor said. "So I suggest a useful arrangement. Test me." He leaned back. "How?" "Give me Creed's copied map, any prior survey in your possession, and the measurements of the disputed spring tract. If I am wrong, you lose an hour. If I am right, you gain the first honest advantage you have had." Alexander studied her for a long moment. Then he rang for a servant. What followed became, in memory, the hour that changed the shape of Eleanor's life. He did not give her trust. He gave her work. Old plats, rent books, survey copies, tax descriptions, and one damagingly elegant forged map were laid before her on a long table. She asked for ink, candle stubs, and a straightedge. He watched without hovering while she compared bearings, watershed lines, witness trees, and chain counts. Twice he interrupted to ask why a detail mattered. Twice she answered without looking up. By the end of the second hour, he had moved from skepticism to the colder attention of a man recognizing expertise. "This line," Eleanor said at last, tapping the lower curve with her pencil, "was redrawn by someone who had never sunk to the knee in Black Run mud. The creek does not yield that shape. And here, this corner bearing, it flatters the ridge westward by almost 4 chains. Not enough for a careless eye, enough for theft." Alexander came around the table. He bent over the papers beside her, close enough that she caught the scent of rain and clean wool. He did not touch the map until she indicated the exact point. When he did, it was with the respect one gives a blade. "You are certain?" "I would stake the little reputation I possess on it." "That may be more than some men in this county would risk." "Then the county is lazy." This time he openly. By evening he had offered her lodging in the East Wing and, less expectedly, a position. "Not as a dependent," he said. "I have too many of those already. Nor as an object of charity, which I suspect you would set on fire. Serve as my secretary for the present. Assist in sorting the disputed papers. If your judgment holds, we continue from there." Secretary. The word was chosen for the household's convenience. It explained her presence without requiring anyone to admit that the master of Ashford Hundred had put a disabled woman at the center of a land case half the county was watching.
Eleanor knew it, and knew he knew she knew it. "Very prudent," she said. "Very necessary." "And if I prove inconveniently competent? Then I shall have to become honest sooner than planned." So she stayed. The first weeks at Ashford Hundred taught Eleanor 2 difficult pleasures: useful labor performed under her own name, and a household in which pity was not the governing language. Alexander did not hover when she needed lifting into a chair or carriage. He simply saw that the thing was done efficiently. When she requested a drafting board adjusted to her height, it appeared the next day. When she asked for chain records from 20 years prior, 3 servants spent an afternoon hauling them from storage. He treated accommodation as logistics. The effect on her dignity was almost violent. But there was more beneath that discipline. He listened. He remembered. He asked the kind of questions that revealed not vanity, but seriousness. At supper one evening, after she demolished a copied plat from Creed's office with 4 quiet observations, Alexander said, "Most people in this county speak to me as though power were a substitute for attention. You do not." "Most people," Eleanor replied, "mistake your title for a measuring instrument." "And you?" "I prefer actual measurements." His laugh, when it came, was low and surprised, as if she had drawn it from a room kept locked. That was the beginning. Outside the house, the case sharpened. Creed's forged maps had been prepared by Silas Nibbs, a copyist of good penmanship and weak conscience. Several tenants swore the western markers had been moved under cover of a storm. A church register located by Eleanor disproved one witness tree's survival. And through it all, Matthias Voss wrote increasingly urgent letters demanding her return, insisting that an infirm woman had no capacity to make independent agreements. The law, as usual, offered many ways to disguise appetite. When Matthias appeared in person at Ashford Hundred, perfumed with righteous outrage and carrying papers for Eleanor's guardianship transfer, Alexander received him in the front study with all the dangerous courtesy of a man who rarely raised his voice because he preferred other people to hear their own disgrace clearly. Eleanor was present by request. "She is my brother's child," Matthias said, "unable to maintain herself. I have arranged a respectable household for her security." "Purchased one," Eleanor said. He ignored her. "She has been misled." Alexander turned slightly toward Eleanor, not to silence her, but to invite precision. "Miss Voss, is that your understanding?" "No. My understanding is that my uncle has mistaken dependency for ownership." Matthias flushed. "See how she has been taught to speak." "No," Alexander said softly. "I believe she arrived with that talent already formed." The stillness in the room shifted. Matthias, who knew how to bully the weak and flatter the strong, chose the second method too late. "Sir, you cannot mean to involve your house in scandal over a crippled woman's fancies." Alexander's expression changed so little that another man might not have noticed. Eleanor did. "When you refer to Miss Voss again," he said, "you will do so as though she were present in the room. The correction will save us both time." It was the first moment Eleanor saw what his power looked like when stripped of public charm. It was not loud. It was final. Matthias left without her. The court hearing was set for late April at the county courthouse in Williamsburg District jurisdiction, where land records, politics, and vanity had long shared the same benches. By then, Creed had realized the danger Eleanor posed. Rumors spread with efficient malice. She had entrapped Hale. She had fabricated papers. She had bewitched him by gratitude. She was a scheming invalid who mistook clerical neatness for knowledge. Eleanor endured it with a calm so complete it unsettled even her allies. "You feel nothing?" Ruth demanded during one evening visit. "I feel everything," Eleanor said. "I simply refuse to let fools enjoy the sight." Alexander, standing at the window, heard her. Later that night he came to the map room where she worked alone by lamplight. "You should not have to carry this much," he said. Eleanor looked up from the tracing she was finishing. "And yet my arms remain serviceable." "That is not what I meant." "I know." He crossed to the table. Between them lay the disputed ridge, rendered in ink lines and careful scale. Beyond it lay the more dangerous territory neither had named. "My father owed yours a debt," he said at last. "Jonas Voss saved Ashford land from a fraudulent patent years before I inherited it. My father meant to repay him more fully. He died before doing so. When you came here, I thought perhaps duty was all that bound me to your cause."
"And now?" Alexander's gaze did not move from hers.
"Now duty has become the least of it."
The room went very quiet. Eleanor had been pitied, managed, traded, and spoken over. She had not often been wanted by a man with enough honor to make wanting look like risk. "That is inconvenient," she said, because breath had become unreliable. "Yes." "Good." Something in his face softened then, not into rescue, never that, but into recognition. He touched the edge of her drafting board, not her hand. The restraint of it nearly undid her. On the morning of the hearing, rain threatened again. The courthouse filled early. Planters, clerks, freeholders, wives hungry for spectacle, and young lawyers hungry for reputation crowded the room. Creed stood broad and florid in buff coat and confidence. Matthias sat 3 benches back with Mr. Pike, each wearing the look of men who believe the law belongs naturally to those already accustomed to taking. Eleanor had expected to be hidden in the rear as a source of papers. Instead, Alexander arranged a place for her at council's table. Murmurs rose immediately. "Let them stare," Eleanor said. "I intended to," he replied. Creed's lawyer began with polished contempt. The Hale claim relied, he said, on old notes, sentimental memories, and the over-educated confidence of a woman not legally qualified to survey anything. Nibs, the copyist, swore to the honesty of his reproductions. Matthias, called on the separate matter of Eleanor's supposed incapacity, testified that his niece had always been impressionable, dependent, and in need of male governance. By the time they finished, the room had the pleased smell of people preparing to watch a nuisance crushed. Then Alexander's counsel stood and called Eleanor Voss. 2 men moved to help her. She accepted one arm, refused the second, and allowed herself to be lifted to the witness platform with the impersonal precision she preferred. When she settled, field book and copied maps before her, something in the audience's appetite changed. They had expected embarrassment. They encountered composure. Counsel asked her name, her father's occupation, the nature of her training. Then he handed her Creed's map. "Miss Voss," he said, "is this an honest copy of the original boundary survey?" "No." A rustle moved through the room. "Explain." She did, not dramatically, not like a woman begging belief. She spoke as a professional speaks when the work itself is interesting enough. She identified the false curve of Black Run, the altered bearing, the impossible witness tree, the chain discrepancy concealed by elegant penmanship, and the copied notation Nibs had taken from the wrong year's field language. She produced her father's field book, then the church burial register proving the white oak had been recorded fallen before the date Creed's map claimed it as standing marker. Finally, she laid beside them a fresh demonstrative sketch made at Ashford Hundred under Alexander's direction, but to her measurements alone. The judge leaned forward. Nibs began to sweat. Creed interrupted twice and was silenced twice. Then came the question Eleanor had waited for. "Miss Voss," the opposing lawyer said, hoping for cruelty, "are we to understand that despite your condition, you possess superior knowledge to men who have walked these lands for years?" Eleanor turned her head and met his gaze with almost tender clarity. "No," she said. "You are to understand that truth does not require legs." The room broke, not into laughter, something better, into shock so complete it became attention. From there the case unraveled quickly. Faced with the field book and register, Nibs contradicted his earlier statement. Under renewed questioning, he admitted Creed's clerk had instructed him to regularize the copy. A tenant confirmed the boundary stones had been moved at night. And when Matthias was recalled regarding Eleanor's incapacity, Alexander's counsel introduced the letters, rent summaries, and corrected ferry accounts she had managed for 6 years under her uncle's own roof. "Did Miss Voss compose these?" Matthias, trapped between pride and perjury, muttered that she had. "Then she is capable enough to govern books, contracts, acreages, and correspondence," counsel said. "Yet not capable enough to govern herself?" Matthias had no answer fit for daylight. The judge ruled first on the land. The forged map failed. The disputed acres remained with Ashford Hundred pending resurvey by officers not connected to Creed. Then, with the room already alive from one humiliation, he turned to the guardianship petition and dismissed it outright, noting that no adult woman who could demonstrate such command of property records ought to be treated as chattel under the convenience of male relations. It was not a revolution. Courts rarely produce those in a day. But it was enough.
When the hearing ended, noise flooded the chamber. Creed left in mottled fury. Matthias could not meet Eleanor's eyes. Mr. Pike vanished like a merchant unwilling to pay full price for scandal. And Eleanor, suddenly exhausted in every bone that answered to weather, remained seated while the room moved around her. Alexander came to stand before her. "You have done more than save my land," he said quietly. "I know." His eyes held hers with a steadiness that had once frightened her because it looked too much like seeing. Now it felt like home offered without condescension. "I have no wish to speak to you as a benefactor," he said. "You would despise me for it." "Correct." "I have no wish to confine you to gratitude either, nor to this house, unless you choose it." He drew breath once, as if the next honesty cost him more than public authority ever had. "Stay with Ashford Hundred, because the work is worthy. Stay, because I mean to establish a proper surveying office attached to the estate and trade routes westward, and I can think of no mind better suited to direct its maps and records. Stay, because I admire you. Stay, because the world has spent too long mistaking your body for your measure, and I would rather spend the rest of my life correcting that error beside you." The courthouse beyond them had not fully emptied. People were still watching. Let them. Eleanor looked at the man before her, the one who had first hidden her under a lesser title to protect the work, then learned quickly enough to place her in full public view when truth required it. He had not rescued her from insignificance. He had recognized significance and made room for it. That difference was everything. "And if I stay," she said, "it will not be as ornament." "God preserve me from trying to make you one." Her mouth curved despite herself. "And if I disagree with you?" "I shall likely deserve it." "And if my maps prove your steward wrong?" "Then my steward will suffer educational improvement." That drew the laugh she had been holding behind her ribs since childhood. It changed his whole face. 3 months later, notices began circulating through the county and beyond. Ashford Survey and Records Office, under the direction of Miss Eleanor Voss, prepared plats, boundary reconciliations, estate copies, and certified transcript work for legal submission. Men who had smirked at her chair sent clerks to request appointments. 2 neighboring estates paid in full and on time. A merchant in Richmond asked whether she might train apprentices. Ruth declared this the clearest evidence yet of divine comedy. As for Matthias, he found his fairy books newly subject to scrutiny from creditors who had once trusted his vagueness. Eleanor did not pursue revenge theatrically. She simply ceased covering his incompetence. Truth, released, managed the rest. In autumn, Alexander took her in a specially fitted carriage to the western ridge at Ashford, where the corrected boundary markers now stood honest under red gold leaves. He had ordered a platform there from which she could view the valley without being carried. The consideration of it moved her more than extravagance would have done. "My father would have approved this line," she said, looking out over the land. "I hope someday you will approve the man standing beside it as well." She turned. He was not kneeling. The ground was rough, and the gesture would have been theater.
He simply stood before her in the amber light, hat in hand, expression steadier than pride. "Eleanor," he said, "I love your mind. I love your courage. I love the way you refuse false mercy and insist on truth, even when truth leaves everyone less comfortable. If there is any future in which you might wish to share your work, your table, and your life with me, I ask for it plainly." She had once believed autonomy and love might be enemies, that accepting one must mean surrendering the other. Now she knew better. The right love did not reduce a life. It enlarged the space in which that life could be fully itself. "Yes," she said. Nothing about the valley changed. The trees did not applaud. The river below did not turn to gold. But inside Eleanor, something long forced into endurance at last unfolded into freedom. By winter, people had learned to speak of her not as the unfortunate Miss Voss, but as Miss Voss the cartographer. Miss Voss whose testimony broke Creed's claim. Miss Voss whose office could untangle a grant no man had sorted in 15 years. Some called her severe, some called her brilliant. A few still called her difficult, usually when charged full price.
She accepted all but pity. And whenever strangers looked first at the chair and then, too late, at the woman seated in it, Eleanor let them make their mistake. A mistaken measurement was easiest to correct after it had exposed the ignorance of the person drawing the line. That, after all, was something her father had taught her young. Land lies, even when men do not. But if one reads the signs precisely enough, even a crooked map can be made to confess.